two little kids with a pair of and a little toy house and a young mouse.
It's reading time at the Lehrman Day School in Miami Beach. The toddlers are just starting to develop their reading skills, and it's too early for their teachers to tell if any of them will have difficulties going forward. Across the country at Stanford University, researcher Jason Yateman is developing a method that may one day give teachers a look into the future, a way to predict a child's reading ability.
What we'd really like to be able to do is predict who's going to struggle before they start struggling, and then develop an intervention basically to target their brain development before they've actually started to show the behavioral symptoms.
Yateman says a child's ability to read can be predicted by studying the development of the connections within their brain. He says reading requires different parts of the brain to work together. So he, along with Professor Brian Wandel, conducted a study using MRI scans to track and map brain development.
People had been looking at activity in the brain for a long time, but the thing that we could do that was a little unique and pretty much for the first time was study the properties of the wires as they develop in the brain, and that's a whole new thing.
We can make measurements of the connections between different brain regions, regions that we understand quite well, and look at the properties of these connections and use those to actually predict how well a given child is going to learn to read.
But Yateman admits measuring brain development is easier said than done. The team needed to find a way to keep track of how quickly the essential neural pathways needed for reading were maturing. He says it came in the form of water.
What we're actually measuring in the type of images we collect is water diffusion. We're measuring the rate at which water molecules are moving through the brain. And this is really fascinating because, as you know, the brain is filled with water and water is constantly bumping into the local environment. By knowing how water diffuses in a given region, we can infer a lot about how cells are organized, how densely packed they are, how coherently organized they are.
And by knowing how well these neural pathways are developing, the researchers can tell if a child will struggle with reading. And Professor Wandel says even more importantly, give teachers other options to educate their students.
So if you knew much sooner, this child is not going to do well at reading, this child's going to need help, you might do stuff like try to get them the information that they need to know using something that doesn't involve a lot of reading, using sound, using images, using other methods.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yateman and Wandel are now looking to develop behavioral tests to collect data needed to predict reading ability. They hope that in the future, science will ensure that when it comes to reading, no child is left behind.
Mama called the doctor said no